people will be able to provide their own questions? Real time.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
Good morning, and thank you for joining the American Shipbuilders Suppliers Association for this virtual offsite meeting. Each year, we usually hold this meeting in Annapolis, but COVID restrictions made this impossible this year. Despite the presence of a pandemic, COVID is not going to stop our members from advocating for the American Shipbuilding Suppliers base. I'm George Williams, CEO of ASSA, and I want to express our appreciation to our member sponsors for their support of this meeting, Thrustmaster of Texas and Elwood Group. I also want to thank all of our distinguished speakers for joining us today and tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Our goal is to keep this two-day meeting to an hour each day to respect your time and that of our speakers. I know some of our guests only call or considering joining ASSA, and we certainly hope you will do so. Please visit our website at www.shipbuildingsuppliers.com or contact me directly at 228-493-6016. And now it's my honor to introduce our moderator for the session today, the chairman of ASSA, Chris Chikanovich of CEI Consulting. Chris?
Thank you, George. Greetings from Annapolis, Maryland. Sorry you all can't be here with me to have this meeting in person, but I am honored to go ahead and serve as the moderator for the next 2 days. Today, we will meet with members of Congress to get an up-to-date review of the legislation they are sponsoring that will strengthen the domestic shipbuilding supplier base. As we all know, the growing reliance on foreign sources for shipboard components has created a critical national security issue. The increased use of foreign suppliers has caused a dramatic shrinkage of the domestic industrial base, and it has created a tremendous set of challenges for the shipbuilding industry. It will literally take an act of Congress to create new opportunities to strengthen what has become a fragile industry. We are honored today to have with us the Honorable Tammy Baldwin, Senator from the great state of Wisconsin, who is leading the charge to reintroduce the Made in America Shipbuilding Act. Senator Baldwin is a champion to the defense industrial base. She's no stranger to ASSA. We were honored to recognize her in 2018 as the recipient of the Honorable Thad Cochran Leadership Award for her dedication and commitment to the industry. Senator Baldwin serves, 1 second here. Of course, I just lost my entire script, so I apologize for that. And I'll pull it back up. So much for technology, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, we're back. Now I know how they feel on television. Okay, Senator Baldwin serves on the Senate Appropriations Committee, the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, and the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. She championed numerous successful Buy American provisions of recent defense authorization and appropriations bill, including the Made in America Shipbuilding Act, which she authored and reintroduced this year. Senator, again, I apologize and welcome. Thank you for championing these issues and for joining us this morning.
Well, thank you, Chris, for that warm welcome and introduction. And I really appreciate the opportunity to join the ASSA as you continue to advocate both in person and virtually on behalf of the U.S. shipbuilding supplier community. And your members, all of you who are on the call today, do incredibly important work in support of our Navy and Coast Guard and the workers in the shipbuilding states they represent. So thank you. So I hail from the great state of Wisconsin, as Chris just mentioned, and we have a reputation for manufacturing and making things. For decades in Wisconsin, frankly, centuries now, we've worked to make things like paper, engines, tools, ships, and these manufacturing jobs have created shared prosperity for generations, and they've strengthened the economic security of the middle class in our state. And no one does that better than us. Okay, I have bragging rights from Wisconsin. We are home to made in Wisconsin companies like Fairbanks Morse and Fox Valley Metal Tech and many others that supply the shipbuilding industry. With your help, I intend to ensure that my home state keeps writing that history for many, many years to come, and that your states continue with your own manufacturing traditions. Now, I've always been proud to fight for American manufacturing and technology, and I believe that when there is a level playing field, American workers can't be beat. Unfortunately, as you mentioned in the introduction, for too long, companies have been incentivized to move manufacturing overseas, and the critical base of domestic suppliers for US government shipbuilding has deteriorated. Without strong Buy America policies, US companies are forced to compete with foreign subsidized companies for US government-funded shipbuilding programs. Buy America must be a policy that is embraced because American workers have skills and a work ethic and a made in America patriotism that is second to none. When you buy American, you are truly buying the best value for our Navy and our Coast Guard and our national security. So I have appreciated the support that ASSA members, all of you, have provided in the past year as I continue to fight to remove anti-Buy American language from the fiscal year 21 National Defense Authorization Act. And I'm also thankful for our partnership in the past defense appropriation bills. We were able to ensure that Navy ships like the new frigate are covered by Buy America requirements for shipboard components. Because of that work, items like diesel engines, reduction gears, and the propellers must be made in America. And we were able to secure language in last year's defense bills to direct the Coast Guard to utilize components manufactured in the US to the maximum extent practicable in their shipbuilding programs. We were able to assure that grants awarded through the Maritime Administration's Small Shipyard Grant Program must be used for projects that use materials that are produced or manufactured in the United States. And these outcomes are significant victories for the US shipbuilding industry, American workers, and the US Navy. So I'm continuing this fight as we wrap up the fiscal year 21 NDAA and appropriations bills, and want to once again prioritize Buy America and the shipbuilding industrial base issues in fiscal year 21 and beyond. As mentioned in the introduction, I am reintroducing the Made in America Shipbuilding Act to support our manufacturers and our shipbuilding industries. This legislation strengthens federal Buy America requirements for the procurement of ships and ship components by expanding current law to cover all federal agencies. The bill also expands current law to cover all types of ships and substantially more of the major components. If US tax dollars are being used to purchase any type of vessel, it should be made in America by skilled American workers and use materials like steel and iron and aluminum that are produced here in the United States. And the shipboard components, the items you all make, should be made in the United States. Incorporating strong Buy America standards into manufacturing and shipbuilding is what drives local economy and local growth and creates middle-class jobs that support Wisconsin and American families. And it's especially important now as we look to rebound from the economic consequences and impacts of COVID-19. Over the past several weeks, many of you have reached out to my office to offer endorsements of this legislation or suggestions of how we can even make it better. That work continues, and I hope you continue to reach out to my national security advisor, Blake Suter, who is on this call, as we work together to get this legislation passed into law. But it's absolutely critical that all of you are talking to your members of Congress, telling the story of the importance of Buy America and Hiring American, and our shipbuilding industrial base. Both are so incredibly essential to our economic security and our national security. So I look forward to our continued work together, and thank you so much for having me join you this morning.
Senator, thank you very much. And as always, I'd like to express our sincere appreciation for your leadership and for including all of the components that our members make in the U.S. So we really appreciate that. Obviously, the critical words are these components must be engineered, manufactured, and assembled in the United States. And while that's obvious, we just wonder, why is this so difficult to get this legislation passed?
Well, it's a great question. And we see different resistance as we try to move these issues forward. Some just have a philosophy of, some of my colleagues that is, a philosophy of lowest bidder no matter what. And I think that's a grave mistake when we're talking about issues of national security. If we don't have the capacity to produce what we need to be secure here in America, we are diminished in terms of our security. I would also add, if you want to use this in your arguments with Congress, the pandemic itself has shown us how important Buy America policies are. The fact that we have not been able to manufacture supplies and equipment and products needed to keep ourselves safe during this pandemic, that we've had to rely on whether it's drugs manufactured overseas, personal protective equipment manufactured overseas, that I think is one of the most striking arguments for why we have to be able to produce the materials and equipment and things that we need to keep ourselves safe. We can't be reliant on others who, you know, are subsidized and aren't really on a level competitive playing field.
I agree. I always talk to the fact that we were repairing engines at some point overseas, and one of the support contractors used overseas workers, and they refused to go to certain countries. So we had to get our ships fixed, and we couldn't even get the support people to come there. We did have a question from the floor. What is your opinion of the Norcross amendment? And have you seen it? And what's your opinion of it?
Tell me a little bit about it, and then I can give you an answer.
Well, a Norcross amendment from Congressman Norcross from New Jersey effectively says we've got to go more than 50% on the content on ships, and he proposes an escalation through the years that gets us to 100% of defense products being all U.S. made.
I certainly think we have to be self-reliant, so that's something that I would be very encouraged by.
Good, good. And that's by 2026 that he's looking to get 100%. Is there anybody else from the floor that'd like to ask a question? Just raise your hand. All right, so Todd Levitt has a question. Todd, you can come off of mute.
Todd Levitt from Northrop Grumman. Thank you very much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I'm just kind of curious, and I know it may be kind of new news to you, and I think it's really starting to roll out in the press yesterday and today. So a perspective from yourself or perhaps Blake, on Secretary Esper's Battle Force 2045 and the announcement of, 500 ship fleet, and particularly, I'm sure you probably support that because of shipbuilding, but particularly not only your thoughts on the 500 ship fleet, but the dialogue around, the mix of up to 170 unmanned platforms. I'm just curious, either your perspective or Blake's perspective on that, as we know that the Navy, as they're working through this unmanned, there's been some hesitance, I guess, on the Hill with regards to those. So just curious, your thoughts or Blake's thoughts on the 500 ship fleet and that unmanned mix.
Well, it is brand new news, so I don't have a lot of background on it yet. The only thing I would say about unmanned craft is, certainly we're dealing with the issue of autonomous vehicles and drones and things like that in other aspects. I haven't heard as much about that at sea, but my learning curve is ahead of me on that. Blake, I don't know if you have any comments on that announcement.
I mean, I think everybody's still digesting the news, and the announcement from Secretary Esper yesterday, raises, a lot of the obvious concerns of, how do we get to that number? It's got to come from somewhere. And as we've seen, Secretary Esper taking an aggressive approach to some cuts and reforms in other areas. So in the budget environment that we have, we always have to look at it through that lens as well. But I think we're all kind of digesting the information, and we're waiting to get a little bit more from the Navy on this.
Excellent. So, Senator, when do you think we're actually going to see this legislation considered?
Well, right now we're dealing with continuing resolution with regard to funding of government programs that expires on December 11th. And I think that we will see a transition from focus on focus on the election, let's put it right out there. And when we reconvene post-election, in addition to issues like COVID relief, we are going to have to turn our attention back to defense authorization as well as defense appropriations. And that is the perfect moment to continue to press this issue for this legislation, or incorporating ultimately into broader legislation. So that's, I think, the timeline. I think we don't have much of a chance of catching people's attention in this final month of the election cycle, but I think we have a real great opening to push as soon as we're in the late November, December time period. And, on into fiscal year or calendar year 21.
All right, excellent, thank you. We had two other questions from the floor. I think the first one was from Laura.
Morning, Senator Laura Haas-Knox, formerly with ASSA. I was proud to give you the Thad Cochran Leadership Award from all of our membership many years ago. And Blake, good to see you. I'm now with Northrop Grumman, and I have a question for you. I'm assuming that, and congratulations to Fincantieri for winning the FFGX program. I'm assuming that you and your staff get regular updates on that particular platform. Do you have any insight that you could share with the suppliers on that platform and how it's going and things of that nature? Thank you.
Yeah, actually, I'm going to also kick this one over to Blake, but I think probably the major, there's obviously the finishing up the LCS line. There's more work to be done there before the transition, but the transition is definitely underway. The last update I got was encouraging news about the hiring that is necessary in order to switch to the new platform. And it's also an area that's being hit really hard by COVID-19. So a lot of the updates I've gotten are really granular in that sense. But Blake, I don't know if you have anything further to add about the preparations to commence the frigate.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add is that obviously pre-COVID-19, Fink and Thierry and the Navy were facing some next steps and hurdles, and not necessarily hurdles, but next steps in getting the program off the ground and running. And one of those hurdles that we were paying close attention to ensure that all of your work was being listened to and incorporated into the Navy's decisions was the decision on component selection, obviously. Now that had a specific timeline that the Navy was required to report back to Congress on what components are going to choose for the frigate to meet the Buy America standards. That's something that we're going to have to continue to talk to the Navy and Fink and Thierry about, and how COVID-19 may have impacted that timeline. But that's kind of the next thing that we're looking at. So short answer is we don't have a full detailed list of everything that's going into the frigate at this point, but that is kind of the next thing that we're looking to monitor.
I would only add one other thing in terms of upgrades to the shipyard itself, and shared work with other neighboring shipyards that are also under the Fink and Thierry umbrella in Door County. But for any of you who have ever watched a ship launch from Marinette Marine, it is an amazing sight. They do side launches. And it is very dramatic. You should look one up on YouTube if you haven't seen one. But there are some reconfigurations of the shipyard in order to be able to launch the larger frigate in a less dramatic way. It'll kind of slide down into the river rather than rather than the side launch. So
I was amazed they hold together after that.
it is a dramatic scene.
And hard and emotional too, I think, in a lot of ways.
Yes, yes. For the friendly rivalries, you know, the river separates Wisconsin from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and we love to send that splash over to the other side and watch it rock back and forth.
I was there for LCS1, and it's you know, a great system and really wonderful to see. All right, well, next was Dana. Dana, if you wouldn't mind.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Senator. A couple of questions. Just our background, we're a still forging supplier making, for example, all the Freedom class ship shafts. So we're well familiar with Fink and Thierry and Marionette and so forth. And the question goes back to an issue we've raised with Congress over and over again, but still have difficulty getting traction, and that is, how do we make people, your colleagues that are opposed to what we're trying to do with respect to components, feel the pain that we feel, in spite of, we know, and this is a huge problem, many offshore companies have U.S. subsidiaries, which they use as assembling grounds and buy the knits and knacks and components overseas. Whereas in the FFGX, we know that you've been successful on a few parts, but the critical components, large components missing they're just glaring. And I know one of our colleagues here, Bob Coates, he's had the experience where can't even get an audience with American builders. So for many of us who, this is our livelihood, we feel the pain, the communities feel the pain, but we can't get your colleagues to have a sense of that. And I would think, and I know I'm thinking logical, and yes, I am married, so I understand how that goes, that in the case of when there's a American assembler, it doesn't seem to me to be a conflict to use American components. So how do we get your colleagues to feel the pain that we feel? Over.
Well, I think it's understanding their pressure points and you know, and sort of telling the whole story. So I've been dealing with this issue in with regard to buses and where Chinese company makes all the components, sends them to the United States. There's a facility that's there with, you know, well-paying jobs that assemble the components that have been manufactured in China. And like many of you, their customers are governments, local governments, cities and counties. And so the pressure that politicians get are, you know, if you insist on Buy America in terms of the components, you're going to put a bunch of assembly workers out of work. And we have to be very clear about the fact that the end product is a subsidized product. They're trying to drive down the price, you know, in China, as you know, the enterprises are often either directly owned by the government or heavily subsidized by the government. And they can put a real dent in American manufacturing by underbidding until we can't produce these things at all or manufacture these things at all anymore domestically. And then they have a monopoly. And we are unable to compete until we level the playing field. So I think the bottom line is that we have to explain the entire supply chain to our colleagues and say, yes, I get it. There are assembly jobs in your community. But if we had Buy America requirements for all of the supply chain in these products, we'd have a lot more jobs and a lot better paying jobs and a superior product, I might add.
And just one last thing, I might add that it doesn't change the assembler's role. It's the origination of the widget that we're talking about. So they get to preserve everything they've got already. So with that, I'll turn it back.
All right, Dana, thank you very much. We had a few more questions, Senator, but we're out of time. I know your time is extremely tight. So we want to thank you for being here today. Needless to say, ASSA is extremely supportive of everything that you do for the American Shipbuilding Base and Buy America Act. So we appreciate it. We owe you some coffee and donuts here in Annapolis, so maybe you'll join us during one of our other events when we get back to doing everything in person. It's always great to see you in person. So thank you again for being here. For the folks who had questions, we'll send those to your office as appropriate. Great. Deal with those that way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It's great to see you all.
Same here. Thank you again for being here. Take care. Okay, our next speaker is another champion of the Buy American reforms, and that is the Honorable Donald Norcross from the great state of New Jersey, my home state. He's attracted recently international attention with his proposed outline in Section 825 that is part of the House Bill 6395. The House passed National Defense Authorization Act for 2021. Currently, for the programs of record to be considered in compliance with the Buy American law, we have a 50% that needs to be made up of 50% American components. Congressman Norcross, you say, well, that's just not good enough. As the member of the House Committee on Education and Labor, Congressman Norcross also serves on the House Armed Services Committee. He also chairs the House Tactical Air and Land Forces Subcommittee. Congressman Norcross, welcome, and thank you on behalf of ASSA for standing up to those who will not support this Buy American legislation. Now we have a range of associations opposing your amendment, saying, given the complex nature of global supply chain, the feasibility of this provision is questionable and is a cause for concern. Please share with us your response to the opposition and give us your views on the unique nature of shipbuilding that is part of your legislation. And thank you again for being here today.
Chris, thank you. It's good to be with folks that I consider going home to. I've worked in the shipyard right across the river from where I live. In fact, the town that I live in now used to boast 30,000 workers in a shipyard called New York Shipyard. We made the first and only nuclear-powered freighter, the NS Savannah, along with great ships that were in our fleet. In fact, as I go in, there's a row of 40 brass shacks. For those of you who remember what they are, the guys go in the morning, used to pick up the brass, and as they left, they would drop it off. It's just reflection back to when America's might was as much from their industrial base as it was from their guns. And that's a place that I'm absolutely focused on. So I appreciate spending a few moments with you. And I got to start by saying thank you. For those of you whose workers continue in a pandemic, never stopped, figured out a way to do it safely, thank you. It is absolutely incredible that during a global pandemic that our country is still able to run. And it's in large part because of what those men and women do who get up and go to work and don't have the luxury like we do to talk on these. So you bring up a point that has been a focus of mine for literally as long as I've been an adult. But moving into Congress a half dozen years ago, we started to look into what does it mean by America? Where does that term get defined? What is it? You know, we have a shrinking domestic industrial base that we see each and every time. And the reason I know this is I spent 30 years out in the field. I started as an electrician. As I like to say, I went to the other 4-year school. I did an apprenticeship. So as I visit, I serve on Sea Power with our chairman, Joe Courtney, and the ranking member, Rob Whitman. We've literally been around the country going to many of the facilities of the folks we're speaking to today and seeing just firsthand the dignity of work, being able to work with your hands and your head. 2 weeks ago, we were over at the Philadelphia Naval Foundry, watching them pour the Columbia class prop. Fascinating. But so few people understand what it takes to stand up something like that and to keep it supplied. You know, you just don't grow that kind of talent and go to the high school or the college and say, send me somebody with those experiences. So when I found out that only 50%, that mark meant that it was made in America, it quite frankly angered me that it is so misleading when we talk about that. You understand how important that is to make sure that you have a workforce, especially now where it's becoming more and more challenging, that so many parents tell their kids, in order to make it in America, you got to go to college. Well, that's true. But as I grew up, I didn't know if I wanted to go to college, build the college, or defend the college. Think about that. We need all three, and they're of equal value. They're just different. So sitting on education and labor, where we just updated the apprenticeship program, first time in almost a half a century. It's important for that industrial base. But let me get right to the questions that we're talking about, made in America. Well, I call it the Swiss cheese effect, and the people on this call know it better than anybody. To be called made in America is a misnomer. So that's why the amendment that passed through NDAA, maybe 2 months ago, included predictability. Nobody's going to bring the work home if they think this is just a 1-year flash in the pan. We need to show predictability, and we need to give them time to make that effort. We understand, we fully understand, especially today, that we are in a global economy, but we can do both. We can keep our friends, we can build our relationships without turning over our industrial base to somewhere else. I was at Picatinny Arsenal up in North Jersey yesterday, having a conversation with my duties on tactical air and land about how do we look at our supply chain? Where does it come from? So often we have a conversation is, yeah, we know where the first supply chain is, that tier is, but where's the second and the third tier? And quite frankly, in many cases, we have no idea. So the question comes up, disclosure. Well, disclosure means a lot of things to a lot of people, and you don't want to give up your trade secrets, and you don't want to disclose an advantage you might have because of who you use. But I think that's incredibly important when we start looking at the security of the supply chain. So we're going to have to find a middle ground on that, so that not for every component, but certainly for those that are extremely important to our country. So as we move down the road here, the NDAA, Chairman Smith, we had a conversation with him earlier in the week. He is absolutely committed in December to passing a one-year NDAA. That's incredibly important because depending on how our country turns out in the elections, there can be very different views on what we should and shouldn't do. But the impact of a CR does not work in the defense industry. It keeps you alive. You're on literally life support, but it's not growing the industry. So we're having conversations where yourselves, and we appreciate you signing on to the op-ed that we did for Defense News a few days ago. We have to have this conversation up front. The Senate, and I saw the end of Senator Baldwin, we have that focus. We have to have this conversation where we're bringing it back home. That predictability with no surprises, that we're going to do it for more than 1 year, that this is about growing the security of America in as much it's about growing the jobs and the companies that go with it.
Congressman, thank you. Thank you for those comments. I appreciate it. And
yes, that is a Battleship New Jersey. It sits out about 1,000 yards from my house. A remarkable piece, especially given the year it was built, right across the river from me.
You got to wonder how we get something that big to actually float.
Absolutely.
I'm originally from Elizabeth, New Jersey, and I often talk about the fact that seeing those big ships floating around made me be one of those kids who says, yeah, I'd like to ride on one of those. And 29 years later, I got plenty of opportunity in the Navy.
Well, when we brought the Battleship New Jersey home from Bremerton, I met it at the mouth of the Panama Canal as it was towed in by the mules. And literally, it had to take the gunnels off the side in order to make it. As you know, the Battleship New Jersey and all four of that class were made to just fit through the Panama Canal, literally rubbing on the side. Just a remarkable piece of engineering and workmanship. Very proud of it.
Excellent. Well, you know, needless to say, as we look at your legislation, we look at the opponents to the legislation. First of all, we ask the question, just how can anybody actually be against this? But understanding again what people are doing internationally, do you really see this affecting international business, how it affects our allies? And do you think it will cause them a great deal of pain as we go forward?
Yes, no, and maybe. How's that for a political answer? Let me get real specific about it. Where it causes them concern is the knee-jerk reaction for seeing Buy American or Made in America. But if they just take a few minutes, and it was reflective in that opposition paper we put out, is that there are so many holes right now. F-35, let's just take that for example, the most expensive program our defense industry has ever been involved in. Every one of those nations would not be affected. That's just taking care of that piece. There's 27 countries that come under the public interest exemption. There is a provision in there that lets the SecDef to make the decision to exclude a piece if in the interest of our country it doesn't work. That's a huge exemption. And there's so many more like that. So at the end of the day, we understand that we need partners. We're never going to win this alone. That has been the hallmark of our country. But if we look back during the Second World War and what production that we put out, we can do it. We have done it, and we need to do it again. But as I had a discussion, there was a bid a couple of years ago for a frigate that involved its powertrain, as I call it, as you know, the motor section, that we did not have the capacity in this country. Well, I immediately say, yes, we do. We might not have it today, but we absolutely have the capacity. And that's what really started this conversation. And it was across both aisles that we all were concerned about this, that we have to have the security of a supply chain, but you're not going to do it based on a 1-year NDAA and appropriations. You're just not going to shift everything back. But if you know that we're serious and we give you a timeline that allows you to make those changes, yes, the work will come back. But that's some of the major part of it. There are so many small ones, especially with some of the suppliers that I see on this call, that they could change overnight, because most people think it is made in America. But when you look down, and I'm just looking through the list of countries, World Trade Organizations is another one. NAFTA, now the USMCA. Mexico is considered made in America. That hurts to say that, but it is. So we understand we have relationships, but we can bring much more of this work home. And quite frankly, we need to.
Excellent. Well, you know, one of the questions that was presented is, why would we continue to utilize component parts from China or another allied and various adversarial nations? I mean, just, it's unfathomable.
Well, interesting enough, we don't know it all the time. That's why I mentioned about disclosure. We had a conversation yesterday about, we need to know that we have a potential crack in the supply chain where many times we don't. Obviously, the GC or the first step of the tier, we know. But is it a component? Is it a raw material that actually starts in China? And once we know, we can make a decision that A, we're going to pay the premium price for it because we want it made in a country that we have good relationships, and that if pressed during a time of conflict, we can get it to our yards to actually use it on the ship production. Well, that's a very big question. Do we want to spend it? So we're talking about provisions in the bidding law, that if somebody says, I want to make it in America and I'm going to buy American-made components, but it costs more, that puts me at a competitive disadvantage. So we have to marry those two together so that in the event that we decide, and I hope we do, that it is more valuable to spend a few more shekels to make it here in America, that we can do that and be competitive one-on-one with those who might be bringing it over from China. It's a tough discussion for some people because you're making that decision. Some of the components are and raw materials only come from China. We need to identify those and stand up American-made suppliers.
And especially since some of the components of those items are supported by their government, just so that they could get on U.S. equipment and then have control over key components. Chip can have information gathered.
You were just talking about the tier of suppliers, and that's if it says made in U.S., made in U.S., made in China. But so many times it's owned by China, who bought an American company or an American supplier or a subsidiary thereof. It gets rather complicated, and the Chinese are very good at trying to hide their outwardly ownership and control. So this is not an easy issue. So even when it says it's made in America, there are sometimes they are controlled by China that we also have to be aware of.
Excellent. We're open to questions from the floor. So if anybody has a question, please raise your hand and pop it up in the communications. Anything from the floor right now?
I see somebody waving.
Hey, Chris. Hi, Congressman. Thank you very much. Can you give us some insight into how your Senate counterparts are reacting to this legislation? For example, are you in conference yet on the
Are we
NDAA?
technically in conference? Yes, we are. That is true. And as you know, you lay them side by side and it is a very complicated process. And so the verbiage issues are being worked out now. The top line dollar issues are not, because as of, I guess, yesterday, and my legislative director, Ryan Ely, is on here. I don't believe we still have the numbers coming from the Senate yet, do we, Ryan?
No, the Senate Appropriations Committee, as you might know, hasn't put out any of their numbers yet, which makes conference a little bit complicated.
So we're taking on, I don't want to say the easier issues, but the verbiage issues right now, and we're working through those. We are absolutely committed to getting this done in December without the CR headaches moving across. But as soon as we put this out, so Mike Turner, when this amendment came up during the markup, he told me, he goes, I'm very much in favor of this, but we don't want to go too quickly. Mike's a terrific guy and is very insightful and has great experience, but I started this 2 years ago, and I can't hear this every NDAA that, wait, can we get together and talk about it? So I said, yes, we will get together and talk about it, but we're going to push forward with this to get it in the NDAA, put it out front, and start having the discussion. Yes, it's complicated. Yes, it changes a lot of things, but if we just keep talking, nothing ever gets done. So this is why I very much pushed it this year. Our friends in the Senate and the White House put out an immediate opposition to the piece. It's so ironic to hear the president talking about bringing it back to America and then him sending out saying, we don't like this. Listen, politics are politics. We'll put that aside. This is critical, I believe, strongly to our national defense. The idea of, and there are many more than just shipbuilding, as you know, of getting shut off from materials or supplies that are only made or come through China is not a very pleasant thought.
So our next question comes from Andres Rivas. So if you could introduce yourself and.
Hey, Andres.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us, Congressman. Really appreciate you and your commitment to making sure and ensuring that Americans are going to be building and creating things for the defense industry. So I work for NAVSEA, and my question is, what more can be done to prevent the feast and famine cycles that you were mentioning earlier? How can we convince suppliers from both the highest tier and the lower tiers who don't always have the necessary resources to do so, to make those badly needed capital improvement projects, to put us in a position to be able to do the things that you were saying?
Wow, in the middle of a pandemic when things are getting squeezed, let me just take the pandemic and slide it aside because that has just compounded the issues. The idea of making capital improvements, which means generally for most taking out those loans, although very inexpensive on the side of the percentages, people are stressed. The defense industry, the money has been pumping out from our major defense contractors to the first, the second tier. But unless we give predictability that we are going to do this for more than 1 year, and that they see that, most owners I talk about are not willing to take that risk, because I go and I lay down that capital expense of millions of dollars, and gee, a new SecDef comes in and doesn't have the same visions as other. That's a tough one it's a tough decision to make. But I think that's why right now is the time to do it, because no matter how it turns out, we know we have 4 years of an administration that we should have some direction in. And that's why we want to start this NDAA, start mapping out a roadmap that incrementally steps up to a percentage that we can live with, but maintains our allies and our friends in a reasonable way. It's all about predictability.
Excellent. Our next question comes from Carl Fisher.
Congressman, let me add my thanks for your comments and your commitment to the shipbuilding supplier base. Recognizing that we have some of the people we've been working very closely and who have been very supportive from the Navy perspective on the call here, and I want to sort of call out and shout out to them for their help. What response have you gotten from the various services regarding this proposed legislation?
Same one I got from generally everybody. It's the initial knee-jerk reaction. But quite frankly, it's from folks who haven't looked into the actual reality of what's going on, that we can still have friends. Many suggest, and it seems to be a bit heavier in the industries that with the aviation, our supply chain, but just look at what happened with Turkey with the F-35 when they decided to make a deal with the Russians. It's costing us literally hundreds of millions of dollars to stand that back up. That's a very outwardly example of when things go bad. But they're concerned, A, because many of our companies sell to foreign partners. I don't think that gets impacted. I think what happens is they start to open their eyes a little bit, look into the way it is today, 50%. And then when you start knocking out the nations that are either part of public interest or trade deals, they don't really have a big problem. This is why this is so massive. The public interest part of the Buy American provisions, and I'm looking at it now, 27 nations. Now, there wasn't a process that was followed to come up with these 27 nations. Most of them are NATO allies, which is great. But that was made by the service secretary who decided that was in the best interest, because the public interest is not defined by statute, it's defined by the secretary. So once they dig in a little bit more, other than the show that they're opposing, they get to go back. Everybody feels strongly about their own country. Trade's not going to stop. Our exchange of products will not slow down. But we can start bringing back the same way it was offshored. We can bring it back and still have plenty of partners. Now, I don't want to dismiss it completely, because partners' perception, countries' perceptions are important. We don't want to feel like we're abandoning them. We're just making some adjustments so that our country can feel more secure. And the reality, we are more secure when we control those vital components.
Excellent. Well, Congressman Norcross, we really appreciate everything that you're doing. I mean, obviously, you're taking on a pretty strong fight here, and we support you in everything that you're doing and making the right balance between economic cooperation and commingled supply chains. Clearly, you've put the needs of the American worker first in our national security concerns, so we appreciate that. We look forward to meeting with you again. My promise that hopefully next time we get back into Annapolis, we owe you coffee and donuts here at the Naval Academy. So we appreciate all you do, and we look forward to seeing you in person during our next meetings. Congratulations on the 47 co-signers you have. I think that was our last count as of this morning.
Yeah, and thank you for all of you on the call, literally, for keeping our country running and safe. We really appreciate it. God bless.
God bless. Thank you. Good seeing you. See you again soon. So I'd like to recognize Carl Fisher. Carl Fisher has something he'd like to do here and making an announcement today.
Thanks, Chris. First off, I'd like to thank all the members and guests who joined today. We do like to have this in person. Last year we had this at the Naval Academy. It was a tremendous success, and we wish we could have done that again, because it's always nice to meet at the best school in the country. But I want to thank of all our members and guests and our speakers for bringing out, I think, some very interesting issues. For those who may be new to the organization, we started this about 9 years ago now to advocate for the very issues that we discussed today. We've addressed a lot of concerns. I think Buy America is the biggest concern that we addressed. We haven't grown as big as I'd like in that 9-year period, but I would say over the past few years, we've had a tremendous growth in the visibility and activity of the association, both on a national and international scale now, given this issue with Congressman Norcross. So what I'd like to do is to have the opportunity, the privilege to recognize and thank a person who has helped us elevate our cause, elevate our voice, somebody who's never stopped working throughout her career to support the shipbuilding industry, and even took on the challenges of ASSA as a single mother and cancer survivor. So I have the honor and privilege of presenting the inaugural Founders Leadership Award to Laura. She was started as our executive director, became our COO, then became the CEO, and throughout her efforts, we've grown visibly, and from a membership perspective, she's worked tirelessly, loves the defense shipbuilding base, now working for Northrop Grumman, so we were sorry to have to lose her. But we'd like to start this effort by recognizing her talents, her skills, and her commitments and leadership. So Laura, I think, Tish, do you have something that we can show?
Wow, thank you.
Laura, for this, this award.
That is beautiful. I'm shocked. Thank you. I feel like I just won the Carl Fisher Academy Award. Thank you so much. I mean, goodness, I think everybody knows y'all all met me when I was just a young lady working for Congressman Gene Taylor, and then for the House Home Services Committee, and then for ASA under the great leadership of Cynthia Brown. This has been in my blood. I'm a Coast girl, and I love shipbuilding, and it's the heart and soul of our state of Mississippi. So I thank you so much. I'm very honored, and I will always have the passion for this association. And Carl, appreciate what you have always done to lead us through challenging times, and I thank you very much. Quite honored. Thank you.
Well, thank you for all you've done for us, Laura. Thank you for your continued participation.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Very honored. Thank you.
Well, Laura, it's an emotional thing, but I appreciate it. As you say, I first met you when we were working on the Hill, and then working for Cindy, and known you for quite a few years, and love you and all the work that you've done. So on my behalf, well done.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I'm very honored. Thank you. And I appreciate it very much. It's quite an honor. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chris, if I could have the floor for a moment.
Certainly.
Sure. Laura came to us. I'm Tom Dicey. I work at Northrop Grumman. We support, Laura and I support Todd Levitt's business unit. And certainly the association's loss was our gain. So she stayed, but I'll tell you, she stays very connected and in tune with what's going on at ASSA. So she's always there with you in spirit. And thanks, Laura, for all you do.
Well, hey, Tom, this is Carl. Thank you. We did hate losing her, but take good care of her, because she's a hard worker and knows what she's doing. So thanks for taking her on board and helping her grow more professionally as well, and expanding her talents.
Thank you, Tom and Carl and Chris and George and Tish and Ann and the whole team. I miss y'all so much. Paul, I don't talk to you every day like I used to. I know you're and Kayleen and everybody else, but thank you so much for this honor. I appreciate it. It means a lot.
Feel free to call anytime. You know we love talking to you. Well, I think that's it for today. Laura did say she'll buy the next round whenever we're together. So thanks very much.
Yes, and thanks to Northrop Grumman, because I am disgustingly wealthy, y'all. No, I would be honored to buy a round.
No, nobody repeat that, because we're just about to review. So,
you know that's no. I'd be honored to buy the next round, and I think I got a little choked up there. Thanks, y'all. I really appreciate it. It means a lot.
You're welcome. Well, everyone, we've covered a lot of ground today, and I appreciate everyone for being on the call. Tomorrow, I'll be making this call from Ocean City, Maryland. So we'll look forward to having better equipment on my end. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to be with us today. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. sharp. We've got a full schedule, so we'd like everybody to be there and ready to go at 10 a.m. We're going to kick off our meeting with an update from Admiral Pompano, PEO Columbia. Following the Admiral, we're going to have presentations from Strengthening the U.S. Defense Maritime Industrial Base from Brian Clark of the Hudson Institute, Ron O'Rourke from the Congressional Research Service, and Eric Labs with the Naval Forces and Weapons Group at the Congressional Budget Office. So we've got a lot going on tomorrow. We remind everybody to save the date, December the 10th. We're going to have the final ASSA meeting of the year. And we've invited Admiral Anderson, who is PEO Ships, and Sean Burke, Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Sustainment, to join us. So that'll be a good meeting. Thanks again to our member sponsors, Thrustmaster of Texas, the Elwood Group for a great meeting. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Unless there are any objections, I say we stand adjourned.
Chris, I assume that Thai is illegal in Ocean City tomorrow?
Well, you know me, I always, when you're selling $1 million programs, $1 billion programs, you should dress appropriately. That's my motto.
Thanks very much for your moderatorship today, Chris. And thanks to all the members and future members out there for joining us. This is what we're all about, and we want to make sure we get your feedback and your inputs. So thank you from my perspective as well.
Well, you know, for me, I always wear a tie because just in case there's somebody from the news media who was wanting somebody new to be an on-screen person, or even the Comedy Central, one or the other.
Well, I think the shorts you're wearing underneath that, though, are,
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. You take care. Have the rest of a good day, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. Cheers.